I don't know about you guys, but I am so excited to start our new domain in knowledge. This domain is extra exciting because it's our very last one. This is our last set of knowledge lessons that we'll have all year. So it's very exciting and a little bit sad too. We're going to talk today a little bit about what this next unit or domain is going to be about. The title of this next unit is Fighting for a Cause. Fighting for a cause. What do you think that means? In this case, fighting doesn't mean that you're physically fighting someone, or punching, or hitting. In this case, fighting means working really, really hard to do something. A cause is a goal. So when we say fighting for a cause, that means that we are working really, really hard to accomplish a goal of some kind. In this domain, we will learn about people who fought for many different causes. The people that we will talk about were not presidents. They were not billionaires or geniuses or people in the government. They were just ordinary people who did extraordinary things. These were people who saw injustices or things that were not fair or not right and fought to change them. Before we go over our vocabulary words for our very first lesson, I'm going to show you some pictures of the people that we'll talk about and tell you just a little bit about them, give you a little bit of information. We'll talk about each of these people in the lessons following. Our first picture shows Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony was a woman who fought to end slavery and to get women the right to vote long before women were allowed to vote in the United States. Next is Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt fought for all people to have the right to a better life with a good education and a good job. This is Mary Mcleod Bethune. Mary Mcleod Bethune helped to get better educational opportunities for people, and she worked with Eleanor Roosevelt and several U.S. presidents to improve people's lives. Next up is Ecke Robinson. Ecke Robinson worked hard to make it possible for African Americans to play professional sports. This is Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks helped make life fairer and better for African Americans living in the South in the 1950s and 1960s. This man is Martin Luther King Jr., and he did many things to make life better for all Americans. You may have heard his name before. We have a special day set aside each year in January when our whole country takes time to remember the wonderful things that Martin Luther King Jr. accomplished during his lifetime. And our last photo is a picture of a man named Cesar Chavez. He saw that some workers were being treated very badly and did not receive a fair amount of money for the work that they did. Chavez helped organize people to change this situation. Inequality. Inequality is a situation in which different groups are given certain rights or privileges that are not given to other groups. Susan B. Anthony fought against the inequality of voting rights for women. Discrimination. Discrimination is unfair treatment of a person or group of people because of their skin color, race, or religion. As an African American, Ecke Robinson experienced discrimination when he was unable to eat at the same restaurant as his white teammates. Equal rights. Equal rights is when all citizens share the same rights without discrimination. Men and women in the United States now enjoy equal rights when it comes to voting. Civil rights. Civil rights are rights guaranteed by a country's government to all of its citizens. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted civil rights, such as the right to vote, for all people. Courage. Courage is bravery when facing danger or a difficult situation. This time, John knew that he had found the courage he needed to climb the mountain. See if you can think of a time when you have had to find courage in order to do something. I'm going to read several sentences to describe a situation that might require a person to have courage. If you think you would need courage in these situations, say, "That would take courage." If you think that you would not need courage, say, "That would not take courage." Our first one is watching a scary movie. What about riding a bike? Playing flashlight tag? Going to the dentist? What about going on vacation? And taking a test? For different people, different things might require or take courage, but some people might not need courage for some of those things. Nonviolence. Nonviolence is an attempt to correct an unfair situation in a peaceful way without using physical violence. Many people who worked toward equal rights in this country did so through nonviolence. Throughout history, people have had to stand up and demand that they be treated fairly. They have fought for equal rights for themselves and for others. Remember, rights are things that a person should have, and equal rights are those rights that everybody should have. You have to be very brave to stand up for what you believe in. Over the next couple of weeks, you will find out about 7 people who took a stand against inequality and demanded certain rights. You will discover that most of these people lived a long time ago, but what they achieved affects us today. They made the world a much fairer place. They fought for equal rights for everyone. One of the types or categories of rights people have is called civil rights. Civil rights are those rights the government gives to people. Civil rights in the United States include freedom of speech, the right to vote, and protection from discrimination. Civil rights also include the right to be treated equally under the law. Different countries have different ideas about civil rights, but the people in this domain all lived in the United States, so you will learn about the struggle for civil rights in this country. There's another category of rights you will hear about called human rights. Human rights are those believed to belong to all people simply because we are people. You will hear about people in this domain who fought for human rights. Many of the people in the stories that follow had to fight for some of the rights we now take for granted. To take something for granted means not to think about something, but just assume that you've always had it and always will. However, these people didn't fight with violence. They fought with words and with peaceful actions. As a result, they changed the world for the better. For a very long time, people weren't protected by any rights at all. For hundreds, even thousands of years, people were at the mercy of those in charge. To be at someone's mercy means that you don't have any power over them, and you have to do what they say. Monarchs, such as kings, military leaders, or tribal leaders, governed with an iron fist. If someone rules with an iron fist, do you think that means that they are kind and gentle, or that they are very strong and strict? To rule with an iron fist means to be very strict or strong. Over time, people began to demand some rights. They wanted to select their leaders. They wanted to vote. They wanted to own property. And they wanted to worship freely. Eventually, monarchs changed their ways, or they were replaced by elected governments. Gradually, governments, including the US government, started granting people civil rights, which meant that people would be treated fairly. Sadly, when governments do not guarantee rights, people face great difficulties. Often the most basic human needs, such as enough food to eat, a safe place to live, and a good education and job, are denied. We should never forget how lucky we are to live in a country that cares about people and their rights. However, even in the United States, the government and some more powerful groups of people have not always treated everyone fairly and equally. For a very long time, in many parts of the world, women did not have the right to vote. In the United States, it wasn't until the 1920s that all women were granted or given the right to vote. This change to the law happened after women protested, marched, and campaigned for this right. To protest means to show that you're upset with something, and to campaign means to take part in activities that are intended to change people's minds or to convince them of something. Until the mid-1860s, in parts of the United States, many African Americans were enslaved. Remember, enslaved people are forced to work for no money and are not free to make their own choices about their lives. Even after slavery was abolished or ended, in some states, African Americans did not have the same legal rights as white people and were not treated equally. In the South, for example, African Americans were not allowed to attend certain schools or eat at certain restaurants. Barriers were also placed in their way when African Americans tried to vote. In this domain, you will learn about two people who helped to defeat this inequality. With their supporters, they marched, campaigned, and demanded equal rights under the law until finally, in 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. This act removed unfair laws by prohibiting or ending discrimination. The following year, the Voting Rights Act removed all voting barriers for African Americans. This meant that African Americans would be allowed to vote just like all Americans, without facing discrimination. Throughout the history of this country, there have been certain people dedicated to making sure that all citizens have the civil rights they deserve. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, wrote the words, "All men are created equal." He wrote those words a very long time ago in a document called the Declaration of Independence. This document was a letter of protest against the unfair treatment of the colonists by the British. The colonists fought for their rights and freedoms and founded a new nation, the United States of America. In this domain, you will find out about 7 individuals who, like Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers, stood up for what they believed in. Here is a quick introduction and a summary of the achievement for which each is known. Susan B. Anthony thought that women should have the same educational and employment opportunities as men. This means that she fought for girls and women to be able to go to school and get the kind of jobs boys and men could get. Susan believed that women should be allowed to vote. She dedicated her whole life to making the world a fairer place for women. Eleanor Roosevelt worked to improve the quality of life for many groups of people, but especially for children, women, Native Americans, and African Americans. She was concerned about the fact that girls did not have the same educational opportunities as boys, and that far too many African Americans lived in poverty. She traveled all over the United States and talked to the poor and needy. She encouraged her husband, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to make changes that would reduce poverty and let everyone live a better life. Mary Mcleod Bethune worked to create educational opportunities for African American girls during the time when there were separate schools for children of different skin color. She started a school in Florida that later became a college. Some people in her community did not like what she was doing and tried to stop her. They bullied her, but she would not give up. Eventually, Mary became so successful that several U.S. presidents sought her advice on how to make the country a fairer place for all. Ecke Robinson was bright, well-educated, and a terrific athlete. He became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. When Jackie first began playing, some of his fellow team members and fans treated him badly. Ecke Robinson did not give up. Because of his courage and talent, he changed people's attitudes or their views about things. On a cold December evening many years ago, an African American woman named Rosa Parks sat on a crowded bus. When the bus driver asked her to give up her seat to a white man who did not have a seat, she refused. She found the courage to say no. After Rosa was arrested, people came together and decided that they wouldn't ride the Montgomery City buses until everyone had the same rights as white people. This was the beginning of the civil rights movement that challenged unfair laws in the South. The civil rights movement is the series of events that involve people fighting for equal rights for all people. Martin Luther King Jr. is perhaps the most famous member of the civil rights movement. He believed in bringing about change through nonviolence. In 1965, nearly one-half of African Americans lived in poverty, and many experienced discrimination every day. Because of Martin's leadership, the civil rights movement forced change and helped to create the opportunities for many people who had experienced discrimination. It became against the law to discriminate against someone because of race, color, religion, or the country in which they were born. Cesar Chavez knew firsthand about how hard it was to be a farm worker who had to travel from farm to farm. He knew that farm workers who did this type of work earned very little money for the hard work that they did. In 1962, Cesar and his friend organized thousands of farm workers into a group called a union. Because so many people came together as part of this union and demanded change, Cesar found a way to improve the lives of all farm workers. The people you will learn about had courage. Sometimes they were bullied or threatened, but this did not stop them from doing what they knew was right. As you hear these stories, think about how different life was all those years ago when these people set out to make the world a better place. Alright, my friends. Again, today was more of a teaser, or a little taste of what we'll be learning about in the next couple of lessons. I do have some questions about some of the things we heard today, though. My first question You're going to think back to our last knowledge unit as well. My first question is, what are some of the civil rights guaranteed by the United States? Remember, we talked about James Madison, who is the father of the Constitution, and the author of the Bill of Rights that lists some of these rights. What rights do United States citizens have? There are lots of rights that are granted to citizens by the U.S. government. Some of those are the freedoms of speech and religion, the right to vote, and protection from discrimination and equal protection under the law. We talked about some famous words that were written by Thomas Jefferson, our third president, that he wrote in the Declaration of Independence. What are those famous words? You've got it. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson told us that all men are created equal. If that's true, why were certain groups of people excluded from certain rights throughout American history? Who denied those people those rights? It was our government. Several times in U.S. history, the U.S. government kept certain rights from certain groups of people for lots of different reasons. All right, my friends, I'm excited to get started on our next couple of lessons, but for today, we have got a couple more things we're going to do. All right, my friends, over the next couple of lessons, our last knowledge lessons, we are going to be working on creative writing. For our creative writing, we will be writing free verse poetry. There are lots of different types of poetry. Most types of poetry have specific rules. Haikus, you have to have a certain number of syllables in each line. Some poems, certain lines have to rhyme, and with words that rhyme, with ending words in other lines. Some poems have a set pattern for where those rhymes appear. But free verse is a special kind of poetry. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's free. There are no rules in a free verse poem. Free verse poems do not have to rhyme. There is not a specific amount of sounds or syllables that you have to have in each line, and the lines don't have to be complete sentences. Instead, free verse poems are simply made up of whatever words the poet chose to include in the poem. As we're writing free verse poems about the people that we're learning about, you'll want to think of what words describe them or are related to the causes that they chose to fight for. We'll go over a couple examples of different types of free verse poems. This first one is a poem about a skunk. Our free verse poem says, black, white striped, tiny round eyes, skunky smell, sharp claws, skinny sharp vampire teeth, big bushy tail, like a flag waving. Help! I need tomato juice. So we've got lots of words that describe our skunk. Most free verse poems include lots of descriptive words, lots of adjectives and adverbs that describe whatever the subject of the poem is. In this case, our subject was a skunk. Let's look at another one. This is a free verse poem about a spider. Small black hairy ball, round crunchy legs, crawling, sneaking, like an octopus, like a robber. Creepiola, fright bite, spidersaurus, go away. Sometimes our free verse poems are written in the shape of the thing that they are about. This is a free verse poem about stars, and it has been written in the shape of a star. This one says, "Stars are so bright, shining above us all, millions and billions, shining from dusk to dawn, with silver light, so pretty." Sometimes free verse poems are written in shapes by using different amounts of words on each line, like we can see in this free verse poem about a tree. A tall, lonely oak tree, winds howl, leaves shake, acorns clatter, down to the dry ground. Or in our last example, they used a different number of words on each line, so their poem has the shape of a raindrop. This is a free verse poem about a raindrop. A drop of rain is like a sudden knock at the door, unexpected, yet often welcomed with a smile. It can brighten your day or ruin your plans. It can make you laugh or make you sad. Whether the raindrop is moving fast or slow, or is big or small, it always gets everyone's attention. A raindrop contains many secrets. It is a bubble of anticipation and surprise. It cleanses the earth, it feeds the flowers, and fills the holes. The raindrop is never silent. It bangs on the roof, spatters on the window, or splashes into a puddle. A raindrop. Notice that none of those poems had rhyming words. A lot of people think that if for something to be considered poetry, it has to have a rhyming pattern, but that's not the case. Poetry is any kind of writing that is done to sound beautiful. Our free verse poems are going to be written about the amazing people that we will learn about. Just like our spider and our skunk poems described the spider and the skunk, you will probably want to pick words that describe the people that we are learning about. I'm going to show you a guide. We'll plan each poem first before we start writing. Remember, that's our first step in the writing process, is to plan. Our planning guide will look like this. We sometimes call this a bubble map. Bubble maps help us organize our thoughts. So for each person that we'll learn about, we'll start with their name in the middle, and we'll use our bubbles to think of strong descriptive words that we would use to describe that person or the cause that they are fighting for, words that are related, that either describe them or are related to things that were important to them. We are not going to write a poem today. Today I just wanted to introduce you to some free verse poems to give you an idea of what they look and sound like. We will start our first poem in our next lesson, where we will learn about Susan B. Anthony. For now, for today, there is nothing that you need to turn in. There is a PDF attached to this assignment that includes a letter that will go that is for your parents, so they know what you will be learning about, and so you know what you will be learning about over the next couple of weeks.